The number of countries whose citizens are banned from the U.S. in some form is about to nearly double. The Trump administration announced last week it's putting strict new immigration restrictions on people from Nigeria, Sudan, Tanzania, Eritrea, Myanmar, and Kyrgyzstan starting later this month. On top of that, the Supreme Court has given the green light for immigration officials to look at how likely a person is to receive public benefits, such as food stamps or Medicaid, when deciding whether they can get a green card. A rule that very well may have kept Trump's own grandfather from becoming a permanent resident, according to many legal experts. Oh, and all pregnant women are now banned from getting visas too, unless they can somehow prove they're not going to give birth in the U.S. or that their trip is medically necessary. And yet somehow, through all of this, Donald Trump has maintained his main goal is to target people coming to the U.S. illegally.
They come in illegally and they go out legally. Very simple system.
So how does he explain last month's deportation of an Iranian immigrant who survived nearly a year of close scrutiny and vetting and had a valid student visa? Northeastern student Mohammad, Shahab, Dehghani, Hossein, Abadi had just touched down at Logan Airport for the start of the spring semester when officers from Customs and Border Protection detained him and refused to let him into the country. As protesters gathered to demand his release, his lawyers filed an emergency petition to keep him in the U.S., which a judge approved. And yet customs officers deported him anyway on a flight to France that took off more than a half hour after the judge's decision. CBP says they were unaware of the judge's order before the plane took off, but his lawyers are not buying it. Today they filed a request for investigation with Homeland Security's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties into how customs officers handled the case. Those attorneys join me now, Susan Church, Kerry Doyle, and Heather Yountz. Good to see all three of you. Thanks so much for being here. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were at the airport and you were doing the legal stuff.
And I was doing the
so
hard work in the office.
Okay, just so I'm clear. So you get a call saying that there's somebody with a valid student, F1 student visa,
yep,
who's being detained at Logan. Is that how this starts?
Right. So all three of us had been monitoring problems since the summer with these Iranian students, and we got a text message, and then we started making calls. And some of those calls were either from Northeastern and other students who knew him and his roommate and his family. And
were you allowed to see him when he was at Logan or no?
No, we were not allowed to see him. We were not even allowed to speak with him.
And you did attempt, and this will be relevant in a minute as to what I said a minute ago, you did attempt to notify Customs and Border Patrol that this filing was happening, right?
So
that if there was, well, you can deal with this.
So many ways.
Yeah.
So I was at the office trying to get work done, and then, per usual, like with the muscle band, I get a call from Susan, and I start typing, and I faxed to CBP, we emailed to CBP, we called to CBP. The two of them were at the airport.
The petition,
harassing
as it's
CBP.
about to be filed with Judge Stearns, right? Is that right?
Well,
or is it Burroughs the first time?
So what happened is we filed it about 7:30, filed electronically. Judge Burroughs was the emergency judge, so she was responsible for dealing with it that day because it was a holiday, and then it got assigned to Judge Stearns through the normal course of events.
Okay, and at 9:27, from what I understand, he issues a 48-hour stay of deportation.
Right.
Is
So
that what he orders?
Judge Burroughs is the emergency judge that day, issues the stay for the 48 hours, and to have him appear at the hearing the next day at 10 a.m. with Judge Stearns.
And 30 minutes later is when his plane leaves.
Apparently, that's what we learned subsequently, because at that time, Heather and Susan were at the window at Terminal E being told that he was being brought down so he could talk to them.
Is it credible to believe that they didn't know?
Absolutely not. So
why not?
When we were at the airport, we started telling them at 7:15 we're going to file a petition. We told them it was filed. We emailed them it was filed. And this is the important part. We went and told them at 9:30 that it had been filed, and they said, okay, we're going to take him off the plane.
They said that to you, affirmatively.
Not only did they say that to us, but there are multiple witnesses where they told us they were going to bring him off the plane. So they lied to us, and we know that that lie was to cover up the fact that they were still trying to deport him.
And why were they still trying to do this? As I said at the beginning, my understanding is there was close to a year of vetting. He got a valid student visa. Why'd they do this?
So I think it's part of a pattern and practice of stonewalling the attorneys, lying to the faces of the attorneys who are representing these individuals, but also a pattern and practice that we've seen through Iranian Americans trying to enter the United States on F1 visas. He's one of more than 10 Iranian Americans who have tried to enter the United States on these visas, who have gone through months and months of processing, many of whom have actually entered 3 times before, like our client, without issue, only to find themselves detained and questioned for hours by 1 to 2 Customs and Border Protection officers.
If they were here and I were to say to them what I'm saying to you is depending on who you're talking to, from what I read in the Boston Globe, his family has a Hezbollah connection. I know you've denied all this, but these are their allegations. He's got some connection to an anti-American group. Oh, and we forgot to say he's going to overstay his visa. My understanding of the visa process, which I don't know much about, is if any of these things were true, they obviously would have come up during the year-long vetting. Is that not correct?
Of course.
So what would they say if they were sitting here?
Well, more importantly, is that, they also did it to my other client, the Harvard student, Rehana, who...
This is in the fall.
Right. Also, same thing. They questioned her for 8 hours, didn't allow her access to attorney. So, and they've done it, it's actually 16 people nationwide. So, yes, the vetting is interviewing, it's meeting at the consulate, it's going through their background. Of course they would have caught something like that.
And it's absurd to say that after all that vetting, and Shahab has had 2 visas. This was his second visa. He'd been admitted to the United States at least 3 times prior. It's absurd.
So if the government does not want Iranians here, why do they grant visas to begin with? Why approve step 1 to do what they did at the airport that you guys experienced? Why just not deny? I'm not defending it. I'm just saying, why don't they just deny them up front?
That's a great question, but you have the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing.
Okay.
And the left hand being CBP, which they're overstepping their legal bounds.
One of the things I don't understand, when I read the original story, I was really glad you guys were coming in, because I know you faxed us some information saying you filed this request for an investigation with a piece of Homeland Security. Why are you not going back to the court and asking that the government be held in contempt for their behavior? If you were convinced that they knew they violated a court order, according to you, no?
Oh, we absolutely believe they violated a court order, and there is no. We are exploring all our options. I would not rule out contempt at all. And that might be one of them. Oh no, I mean, Kerry.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we're looking at filing for a show cause, which would be a contempt order. We're also looking, there's a piece of the legal complaint that's still ongoing because we'd asked CBP to reconsider their finding of inadmissibility.
We also asked the judge to order CBP to go over and get them and bring them back. Did you not? Right. And what their contention is, they don't have jurisdiction because until you get through customs, you're not under jurisdiction. Is that
right? So this is the legal fiction, is that when you're in an airplane and you're landing and before you come through inspections, you're not actually in the United States. So there's some debate about that. But frankly, if the federal government and the federal courts can have jurisdiction over individuals in Guantanamo, they certainly can have jurisdiction over someone sitting at Logan Airport.
So this is not the end of this thing.
No.
One of the things what do you do? An Iranian student calls the 3 of you on the phone tomorrow and says, I just got my visa. I went through a year of this. Are you laughing because this is happening? Or?
It happens all the time.
Okay, so he calls you tomorrow. I'll start with you and says, what do? I did everything legal. I've been approved. The process has been approved. But I'm scared I'm going to get to Logan, and I'm going to live through exactly what advice do you give him?
I think the concern is coming through Logan at this point. There are other airports. I mean, you talk to them about flying to other airports at this point.
I think you fight. I think this is outrageous. I think this is something that we want to catch them in the act doing, and we want to sue them over it, and we want to prove that this is discriminatory, it's retaliatory, and that it's unfair.
But a person has to be terrorized for you to be able to make that point.
That's our government these days. That welcome to the world of Trump's
So you would say,
lawyers.
So you would say to the next similarly situated student, you are legally entitled to come to this country, stay in touch with us, and come on down.
Absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
I wouldn't say, oh, just come on down. I would say, talk to an attorney before you come, know what's going to happen, what could happen, what your options are, and make an informed choice. But it's unfair, and you shouldn't have to get, like, our client gave up 2 years of his education at Northeastern. My Harvard client gave up a full scholarships overseas in Europe to go attend Harvard Divinity School, to get a master's in theological studies. Really? That's,
And I will point out, CBP does have authority to review somebody, but within legal parameters.
Right.
And there are times where we say, okay, that was fine. But in this case, they went way outside the legal standards that they're allowed to work.
I think I'm
inside.
speaking for a lot of people in saying we were all glad the 3 of you were there. Thanks for being here tonight, too. Heather, good to meet you.
Great
Thanks
to
so
meet
much.
you.
You too,
Nice to
Kerry.
see you. Thanks.
Susan, great to see you
Good to
as
see you.
always. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good luck with you.